Welcome back to Psychedelic Therapy Frontiers, the podcast devoted to exploring the frontiers of psychedelic medicine and what it takes to cultivate a healthy mind, body, and spirit. I'm Dr. Steve Thayer, and today my co-host, Dr. Reid Robison, and I talk about holding space. We discuss what it means to hold space for others, like a partner, or a friend, or a child. We talk about why holding space is such a special gift when it's done well, like in a psychotherapy session. We also explore the power that skillful space holding has in a psychedelic therapy session. Hey, in case you haven't heard, the biggest psychedelic science conference in the world is happening this June in Denver, Colorado. The MAPS Psychedelic Science 2023 conference is coming up fast. Reid and I are stoked about being there. We're also stoked to announce that Numinus is offering an exclusive 20% discount code to our PTF Podcast listeners. To access this 20% off, click the link in our show notes below and use the code NWI20 at checkout. Also, if you're interested in developing the skills you need to provide psychedelic-assisted psychotherapy, but you don't know which of the many training programs to sign up for ours. For example, you could take our course entitled Psychedelic Harm Reduction and Integration, Introduction for Practitioners. So if you'd like to learn how to assess client needs during the different stages of psychedelic journey, apply a harm reduction framework to assessment, preparation, and integration, articulate the current ethical limitations and considerations of psychedelic harm reduction, and how to support and guide clients through the integration process, then follow the link in the show notes below, or visit numinus.com/our-training-selection. And of course, if you'd like to support the show, you can always do so by subscribing to the show, by leaving us a review or a rating in places like Apple Podcasts or Spotify, and or sharing the episode with somebody you think might enjoy it. Without further ado, here's our episode today on holding space. So Reid, there are a lot of like these trendy phrases that get adopted in the therapy world, the self-development world, the coaching world. And one of them is holding space. You hear that phrase a lot. Like, I need someone to hold space for me, here in the psychedelic therapy world too. So I thought it might be fun to just talk about space holding. What does it mean?
I'll hold space while you do.
Please hold safe space. It's similar to the phrase like safe container. I remember I was telling my wife about different relationship containers, and she's like, every time you use that word container, I just think of a big like Tupperware container within which we are holding space. But yeah, what do we mean when we say we're holding space for somebody? What do you think?
Yeah, sometimes those trendy terms, very often, in fact, bug me. But this one doesn't. Maybe it hasn't trended to quite that level in my worldview yet. But I love the concept of holding space for others in day-to-day life, in therapy, in psychedelic work, in relationship, in parenting, and holding space for oneself.
For ourselves.
But the way I think about it is holding space as being physically, emotionally, mentally present, fully present for another so that they can have their experience fully, they can feel their feelings fully, and so they're safe enough to surrender and go deep.
I like the notion of safety, right? Because it's everything you just said. And in case you didn't say it, it's like a space that is characterized by non-judgment. And as the space holder, it's not about you. And that's not typically normal in your everyday interaction. There's some reciprocity. Yeah. There's like, I want something out of this interaction. They want something out of this interaction. If I'm not doing it well, I might be trying to grab space, steal space for myself. Which is why I think when you're in an interaction with somebody and they are holding space the way you're describing, it's so special. And why, it's sometimes only the purview of a therapeutic relationship, or when somebody is deliberately trying to hold space for you, it's unique.
It's a special gift too that you can give to someone of being present unconditionally, without judgment, like you said, without wanting to grab the space and attention for yourself, so that they can be fully seen and heard and vulnerable.
Right. Yeah, we've referenced it or talked about it a lot on the podcast before about like why therapy in particular is so helpful, and one of these reasons is because of the safety, like we're describing here, of that container, of the space that allows a person to be vulnerable, like you described, and it's really hard to do work in real time, like do psychological work in real time, without the safe presence of another person. So I think non-judgmental, all these phrases that we're using are key components of safe space holding.
And I love hearing it about someone's therapy session when they say, I can say anything to my therapist and they don't judge me, they don't bolt, they're still there. And on the flip side, I hate it when I hear the opposite of when therapists forget to do that, forget that crucial role and interject their own judgments. You mentioned like relationship containers, for example. That's just an example we could use of, let's say someone comes in and they're in a unique kind of relationship situation. And if a therapist has preconceived notions or judgments about that, and they let that out, instead of the client feeling safe to go deep and vulnerable and free of shame, they might come away with feeling extra shame. You know?
Yeah, that's a good point. And I think it's also, you could say that holding space is a skill that you could develop.
Yeah.
Because, I guess there are certain dispositions that draw people, I could say that differently. Not everyone becomes a therapist, right? Not everybody has the disposition or the skills to hold safe space like we're describing. But it's something that can be learned.
I agree.
Like when you do couples therapy, a lot of what you're doing is you're helping the couple hold space for each other. Like you're teaching them how to listen deeply, how to do reflective listening, how to not fix the other person, and instead allow them to be vulnerable in the other person's presence. And that's really tough when there's been harm caused in a relationship.
Yeah, it's almost the default mode or the more common stance in relationship of any kind is to be more preoccupied with your own shit, your own stressors, and even what you're going to say next, or how what they're saying relates to your life. But holding space, like real space, means putting all that aside and giving someone your full undivided attention.
Yeah. So as we're describing this, you can imagine why this would be so important in a therapy relationship, why it would be so important in a psychedelic therapy session. And, in a regular relationship with a kid, all those things you were describing. Why else do you think it's, kind of thinking out loud now, why else do you think it's hard for people, like why is it challenging for us to hold space?
Well, using the relationship example, I think, is a good one, because, holding space in intimate partnership is extra hard because it's often about your dynamic, about the stuff that flows in between you two and that triggers things. We're mirrors for each other in relationship. So I think it's the most crucial skill for success in relationship is learning to hold space and not jump in with defensiveness or even jump in with wanting to fix it or you should do this, you should do that.
It reminds me of that hilarious video, It's Not About the Nail.
Yeah.
I may have mentioned it on the show before, but if you go to YouTube and look up It's Not About the Nail, you'll see this funny little sketch where this woman has this giant nail in her forehead and she's complaining about headaches and she's like, my sweaters keep getting snagged, and her husband's like, you could pull the nail out, and she's like, it's not about the nail, I don't want you to fix, I just want you to be here. And so finally he's just like, oh, that sounds really hard, and she's like, yes, thank you. So an extreme and comical depiction of what we're talking about here. But they're in this IFS level 1 training that I just completed that we were talking about a bit last time. There was this practice of U-turn that applies to relationship really well, of trying to notice when you get triggered and you want to make it about you.
you get out of that unconditional, non-judgmental presence, and how to more quickly turn that around and come back to holding space. And having tried that on in the practice sessions, and since then, like, you know, including in relationship, it's been really profound. In fact, like Hannah and I have been playing with it a lot lately, of just making this commitment to both bringing stuff up when it needs to, when we have feelings or needs, and committing to like really listen to that in the other, without that jumping in. And it's been amazing to just like make a conscious practice of that.
So what's the mechanism behind the U-turn? Like what do you do differently when you make that U-turn that you're not doing otherwise?
Well, one thing they had us do was, as a practice, is you imagine your capital S self, your higher self, sitting in a chair across the room. And say you're walking towards it, and you notice in your mind, in your thoughts, in your body, your feelings, anything that pulls you away from that, return to your whole self, your higher self. And you notice all the things that pull you out of presence. And I've been doing that as a meditation practice a lot, and like reviewing the day or middle of the day, of just like, okay, today, when has my monkey mind been extra active? And what do you do about it? Like, how do you return to that loving awareness? And it's almost funny how simple the answer is as I'm sitting in meditation thinking, okay, I just had all this awareness and everything about the parts of the day when I got into overthinking mode. How do I do that throughout the day? You just do exactly what I was just doing. Sit and let your mind settle into some stillness and return to presence. And in relationship, that gets a little harder when you're having a dynamic dance of a discussion. But sometimes that might look like just reminding yourself to listen, not to fix, whatever it may be. Or like in MDMA sessions, we use that acronym WAIT. Why am I talking? Just to remind ourselves to not jump in unnecessarily. But it might mean like being tuned into self and other at the same time, which is part of holding space, so that you can speak up when you might be getting flooded and say, you know what, my nervous system is feeling a bit frazzled. Can we pause and come back to this in 5 minutes or 5 hours or whatever it is? Or and that goes a long way too.
Yeah, I was sort of brainstorming the reasons why holding space can be difficult, and flooding came to mind. And that applies to professional space holders, like therapists and coaches, psychedelic therapists, whatever. I remembered I had a supervisee once who had a client, a prospective client, so they'd just done an intake with this person, and this person was a registered sex offender. And my client said, I can't work with this person. I can't hold space with this person. I was sexually abused when I was younger. I just can't get past that particular issue. Even though I know this person, in spite of what they've done, is suffering and they're in need of help, this is just not something I could do. And I think that's an important awareness to have. You know, are there situations in which you, because of your self-knowledge, know you wouldn't be able to hold space? In this situation, I encouraged this therapist to refer the client to somebody else, to have the conversation with them, but to refer them to somebody else. Yeah,
and that's wise. That's a sign of strength, not weakness, in my opinion, is recognizing like, oh, I can't hold unconditional, non-judgmental, loving presence for this individual because of whatever I've been through in life and what that might trigger for me. And it's also one of the reasons why we do the dyad model in a lot of psychedelic therapy, like in our studies, why we have two of us, not just the male and female energies, which may or may not always be the case. I know MAPS likes to do that model, but even just having another to kind of tap in, tap out, and hold that broader container of safe space come what may.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And your mention of the psychedelic therapy sessions reminded me of an experience of one of my clients, or I guess a research participant, where they felt like the psychedelic experience helped them hold space for themselves in sort of the way you were describing with your meditation practice, in a way that up until that point had been unavailable to them. So they're sort of oriented to their higher self, and anything that pulled them away from their higher self was really, really clear to them. It was like, I have this desire to do X, Y, or Z, or I don't want to feel what I'm feeling right now. Oh, interesting. I guess just a little tangent on why psychedelic medicines might be especially helpful for people to have self-compassion, self-acceptance, all the components that would need to be there to hold space for oneself.
Yeah, and that reminds me of a question I wanted to pose to you of, do you think you have to be able to hold space for yourself to hold space for others?
Have to is tough. I think, like we were talking about, there might be certain people that are too challenging for you to hold space in a given time in your life, or maybe you have certain boundaries around problems that you're not able to hold space for, or people you're not able to hold space for. But I think my guess would be and this is, I guess, not even a guess because this is my own experience, the better I am at holding space for myself, the clearer I am when I'm trying to hold space for somebody else.
Yeah.
Right. I'm not polluted by my own needs in those moments when I need to sort of set them aside so that I can be 100% for somebody else. Sometimes when I'm talking to a new client and they're curious about why the therapeutic or the coaching relationship is different than regular relationships, I'll say, well, it's different in a lot of ways, but one of them is that you owe me nothing except the fee and to show up.
Yeah.
That's the only reciprocity that has to happen in this relationship. Otherwise, I am here 100% for you every time you come here. And that makes it different than regular relationships. So with respect to holding space for yourself, I feel like the concept of internal parts has been one of them, and I referenced this in a recent episode we recorded, but has been one of the things that has helped me hold space for myself the most. Because when I have something come up, it's not all me. It's just a part of me, like you were describing with your meditation. So then I can breathe, pause, relax, try to get back to core self, higher self, capital S self, or as I heard somebody call it, big ass self.
Big ass self.
And just let it be.
I love that. And I would say the exact same thing. Like, the better you are at holding space for yourself, the better you are at doing that for others. And you can practice with your parts. Or through a framework of viewing the symphony of selves inside of each of us, where there might be a protective part that has a voice when something is triggering, right? To avoid a bigger pain, right? It might just start chattering loudly. And if we can slip into that observer seat and expand our awareness around, instead of being that part and getting caught up in it, just like seeing that as a part or one of the voices inside of us, that's how you do it. That's how you practice it.
Yeah. And when we were rattling off the qualities of space holding, we talked about compassion. That, for me, the concept of parts have helped me practice self-compassion more thoroughly than I ever have. Because it's always been pretty easy for me to have compassion for others, but often very hard for me to have compassion for myself. Like, it's really hard on myself.
Yeah.
I imagine a lot of you listening to this can relate to this. But then thinking of, sometimes when I do things I'm not proud of, or I don't show up in a way that I'd like to show up, or I don't accomplish what I want to accomplish, I used to try to motivate myself through self-criticism, or just like to be really hard on myself. And that was a kind of fuel that worked. It got me where I wanted to go, but it was, like I like to say, it was a dirty fuel. Like, there's a lot of collateral damage approaching it that way.
Yep.
So instead, now that I can just see, I just did something I'm not proud of, but that was the result of a particular part doing a particular thing for probably an understandable reason, even if I don't want to put that part in charge of my life. And so it allows me just to pause, and then I don't get stuck in these sort of spirals of self-criticism and shame.
Yeah, and I agree that the number one quality of space holding would be compassion. In fact, that reminds me of something else I was going to ask you is, I was reading some work by Fadiman, James Fadiman. He's done a lot in this realm, transpersonal and the Guild of Guides and things like that. And he and others in his circles say that the two main essential qualities are compassion and intuition of space holding or guiding. And I was wondering what you thought about that intuition bullet point.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
I've been actually trying to connect to intuition more lately through my own personal work, because historically I've been a fairly rational guy. Like I use my mind quite a bit, and I've been a little disconnected from my intuition. Part of that is because I had OCD growing up, and so it was hard for me to trust what felt like feelings, and then I would just engage in this really, really punishing series of thoughts to try to tease apart what was real, what was true, what I had to do. But I've been finding my way to intuition lately. And I guess as I'm just thinking out loud about it, it does make sense why that would be important for good, effective space holding. Because a lot of times what is good to do when you're holding space for somebody might seem counterintuitive, but might seem like, what would be a better way to say that, Reid? Like, it doesn't necessarily sync up with the protocol in my mind, but it does feel like the right thing to do. Because I'm connecting with this person more subtly, or maybe at a heart-to-heart level. Yeah. So I'm rambling a bit because I don't know the right, maybe quote-unquote right answer to that question, but what do you think?
Yeah, and I ask it because it gave me pause too and made me think, what do they mean by intuition? And I like the term attunement, and I think that's a part of it. Like in space holding, we attune to self and others, and we even watch sometimes we call it microprocessing, right? Watch the subtle movements, like you said, of someone's body language, their tone of voice, their speech. They may be shifting their gaze as they move towards sharing something difficult or heavy, but that might not be. That may be the case for one and not the other. And the more you sit with someone, the more you get to know what it means for them. And I think attunement through the course of a session begets intuition, if you want to call it that. Like being able to know with more and more confidence when to intervene and not, when to offer like a hand to hold, right, and when to just sit there in silence in that quiet space holding so they can really have their experience. But yeah, I think the attunement involves tuning into the other person's thought processes, emotions, gut, and your own. Right.
It's making me think, what you're describing, all the more reason to get your static, your noise out of the way, like your own personal noise out of the way, so that you can be attuned to the person you're trying to hold space for. You can pay attention to those cues. Harder to do when your mind's not present, like you're thinking about stressors outside the room, or when you're distracted by your own triggers.
And like we were saying about in partnership or relationship, holding space can literally, in my opinion, save your relationship. Or it can drastically improve your relationships with friends, family, kids, because you're getting your own preoccupations and projections out of the way, letting someone be themselves, and that's a beautiful thing. And it's so connecting in that state of vulnerability. People share their deeper truths, and that's a gift. It's an honor. And you could literally thank them with a heartfelt appreciation for trusting you with their deep thoughts and feelings and secrets or heavy burdens in life.
Yeah, it's an honor. And I think for those of you listening who are fixers, people who will hear what sound like complaints and immediately go, well, have you tried this? Have you tried this? Have you tried this? And if you've noticed that the person you're doing this with, your partner, your child, whatever, tends to be defensive when you do that, tends to be reactive, tends to get more entrenched, you might want to just experiment with this, with holding compassionate, validating space. And you'll probably find that when you do that, they'll actually move toward corrective action on their own. I've seen this a lot with children, especially my own children.
Yep.
When I'm immediately there with like, well, you're struggling because of this. Why didn't you just try this? Or why don't you try this? Or, or if it's less critical, I'm trying to be more loving, but I'm still moving toward a solution. A lot of times my kids will just get, defensive, or they'll start coming up with reasons why that won't work. But if I validate, if I make sure they feel seen, heard, and understood, more often than not, they'll calm down and they'll start to move towards solutions, or after they've felt seen, heard, and validated, then they'll be open to feedback.
Yeah, like sometimes the most loving thing we can do for someone is just being there, right? And sitting with them in loving support. And on the kid front, it reminds me of our parenting chat a number of weeks ago of like, really as a parent, your job is to hold space in two ways. One is to keep them safe. And two is to let them have their experience, feel their feelings, and explore the world. And I would say the same thing applies in a psychedelic therapy session. Like your job as a guide holding space is to keep them safe and let them have their full experience.
Yeah, you become this sort of sanctuary that they can return to. I remember doing a ketamine-assisted therapy session once, and the client would every once in a while say, like, "Where am I? Are you still there?" And I would just say, "I'm here with you. You are wherever you are." Or sometimes I'd just say, "You're on ketamine." Just remind them, right? Okay.
Oh,
and then they could move, right? But if they got stuck and they were starting to panic, just the simple reminder, like, I'm here, your body is here, your body will keep you safe. I remember saying that to a particular client who was having trouble with their body. Your body's got you, go ahead and explore. It just allows them to be curious. It's hard to be curious when you're terrified, when you feel like you're unsafe.
Yeah. And as an example of the intuition component, if you were just sitting there, not tuned in, and feeling like you're going to remind them with an unsolicited statement that, remember, I'm here and you're on ketamine, whenever you felt like it or your little timer went off, it would be highly distracting. But that's maybe an oversimplified example of the attunement and the intuition of knowing when to intervene and when not.
Right. Yeah, I like that you brought up the acronym, the WAIT acronym. Why am I talking? Because I've found that I with the experience that I have, when I was a younger therapist, I tended to intervene more. But now, like, I'll have sessions, depending on what the client needs, but I'll have sessions where it's apparent that a lot of space holding needs to happen, where I will maybe say 10 words the whole time. Because this person just needs to be who they are, where they are in that moment, and be witnessed. So we'll get to the end of a session and a client will be like, "Oh, I feel so much better, thanks. Sorry I talked so much." And I'll just say, sorry, no apologies necessary. That's precisely what needed to happen. I got a message from a client I saw this morning. They messaged me just an hour after the session and just said, "Thanks again for letting me cry with you. Sometimes," I can't remember exactly what the message said, but it's like, sometimes you just need to be with somebody who gets it. I think that's what they said.
Yeah, that's amazing. And it reminds me of what I see as some of the big benefits of having someone hold space for you is so you feel less alone, so you feel seen, understood, cared for, supported. And that's huge. That's a corrective experience in and of itself, and an experience that lets you do the work. Yeah.
Along similar lines, I remember a client who felt particularly self-conscious about being in therapy and about being a burden to me.
Mm-hmm.
And halfway through the session, I'm so sorry that I'm dumping all this on you. And I just said, I want to be here. And just let that sit in the air for a minute. And then she just, started crying. And, and then I said something like, how does it feel to be wanted? Like, for me to want to be here. And that took us down some really, really fruitful paths.
Yeah, that's cool.
So not only is holding space, well, let me back up. Not only do you want to be compassionate and non-judgmental, but along the lines of being seen, people want to be seen by people who want to see them too. And that doesn't mean you can't hold space with somebody who maybe is triggering you a little bit. Like I can't say that when I'm holding space for my child who's throwing a tantrum or something like that, that I always really want to be there in that moment, at that exact moment. But if I can show up as authentically as possible, it matters. And people can tell.
Yeah. And I mean, even if it's not easy, like in the peak of a psychedelic therapy session, when someone's having a whole lot of intense emotions, distress, it's not easy work for the space holders, right? But you want to be there, and you have this like intention of loving presence. And, with your kids, it's the same way. You wouldn't have it any other way. You wouldn't want anyone else to have that sacred honor of holding space for their temper tantrum so they can, get to know their feelings and inner world and move through emotions. Because it doesn't always, it's not often held with kindness and compassion out there in the world.
Right. So if you are a person who needs someone to hold space for you in a relationship or a professional or something like that, how could you go about asking for somebody to hold space? Let's say, your partner has a tendency to rush in and fix, but they're a good person, and that if they knew what to do, they probably would do it. It can take a lot of courage to say, what I need from you right now is just to listen. And if you've had a conversation with your partner about this beforehand, it'll probably go over better. But hey, sometimes when I'm feeling X, Y, or Z, or when I'm doing A, B, or C, I just need you to be there.
That works.
It does.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Even if it pushes an ego button in the receiver of that. Like I've been there, and I have fix-it tendencies as well. And I really appreciate the reminder, because I want to keep that. I desperately want to keep that at bay. The reminder to just hold sacred, loving space, not jump in with reassurance or fix it or, you should do this, but just listen, exude compassion, and validate. And I've just, through all this, like, clumsy fumbling through trying to find my way in that kind of dynamic, I've landed on this. If someone wants my advice, they'll ask. They'll invite me to share, and then that's my golden clue to just offer some. What would you do? But otherwise, I'm just actively listening and loving as best I can.
Yeah. And if you are the space holder and you aren't sure what this person needs, you might just be explicit. Just ask them. Like, hey, I've got some ideas I'd be happy to share with you, but what do you need right now? Do you want me to listen? And I'm hesitating to use the word just, like I'm just holding space or just listening, as if it's, simple or not important or whatever. But yeah, also there might be people that you would not want to ask to hold space for you, or you would not want to assume that they will hold space for you. It's okay to have boundaries and to only have certain people in your life that you're willing to be that vulnerable with. Because not everybody's willing to do this. Not everybody wants to do this. And or even if they're willing and wanted to, not everybody in your life is going to be have the requisite skills to do this.
And that applies to psychedelic space holding a lot as well.
Yeah.
Like I can think of certain qualities in people that might be really fun socially, like someone's talkative, big energy and charisma. It might be fun when you're at a restaurant, but when you're trying to do inner work and go deep, and someone has that kind of style, it might not be very, very conducive to your intention.
Right. Yeah, that's a great point. Because there's a lot of people, I know that there are a lot of our listeners who are seeking psychedelic experiences from underground guides, or they're seeking it out of the country. There's a lot of people having psychedelic experiences right now. And some of them recreationally, but some of them for deep healing. And it's important that you vet who is going to be holding space for you as much as possible.
Yeah.
Have some experience with them. I'm not a big fan of the first time you meet somebody is the day you're going to be doing powerful psychedelics with them.
Yeah.
There might be some exceptions to that. Sometimes I was going to say, we don't do that in our studies. Like, depending on the study, there's always at least one meeting with the study therapist team before you're going to be doing a psychedelic substance with them.
But interestingly, in ayahuasca circles, in the underground, in the jungle, wherever, it seems like more common than not that people don't meet the shaman before that first kind of medicine circle. And, you know, for many, and even in my experiences, that's worked out well in many cases, and you find who you want to go back to. But I agree with you, and it's set up for a good reason to establish the relationship and start working on that sense of safety from the beginning. And in the good facilitators that I've sat with, even in like, you know, these ayahuasca circles, there was a lot of time before drinking the medicine to establish that safe container.
Right. Yeah, and I guess there are other cues that you would want to look at if you didn't have a lot of time to meet and get to know a person that would help you feel safer. You know, if this person's been doing this for a long time, if other people who sat with them have had really positive experiences. Yeah. Or if just the way they conduct themselves in the brief preparation hours, if it feels really, really good to you, then that can be a good sign that you're going to be held well in that space.
You want to try something? I was just thinking earlier of what does space holding do, and a couple questions that might be useful to try on that people could follow along. Like, think of a time when you were vulnerable in the recent or distant past. I'll wait until you have one. Maybe you were shedding a tear or two.
Yeah. Yeah, I can think of
something in mind. Okay, what did you need in that moment? Did you need unsolicited advice?
Definitely
Problem-solving. Funny how we jump in and react with that very often. Did you need someone to tell you what you should have done? Or
not in that moment. Not in that moment. No.
So what did you need?
I needed to know that they got me. Like, I also needed to know that they weren't, I wanted to know that they weren't overwhelmed by my emotion.
Yeah.
Like when I say that they got me, I need to know that they could handle what was happening. And I wanted to know that they weren't critical of what was happening. Like that all of this, all the messiness that I was feeling, that I was demonstrating, was absolutely okay. Not like pretend okay. Like, okay, I can handle it. All right, I'm sure I can handle it. I needed to know that they actually could handle it. And they actually did want what was happening, and they welcomed it. That sincerity, and I guess I'm revealing a lot about myself here, but that sincerity was in that moment paramount. I needed the safety of that space to be accurate, authentic, real. Yeah.
No, I love that. It reminds me of a fairly recent psychedelic therapy session I sat in as a dyad with Hannah, my partner in life and sometimes in these work sessions, and where the client was having some big emotions, and we could tell there was some shame blocking kind of the path forward for them, and pretty soon the client let something out like, you know, I've never told anyone this. It's too big. It's too big. I could never. But what Hannah said not only struck me, but like paved the way for something beautiful. Was like, there's nothing you could say that would be too big or too shameful or too much for us to hold here with you. And then as they sat with that, it was like you could just see the walls crumbling and the vulnerability opening. Yeah. And for someone to share for the first time something they've held for years because they just felt it was like too big to share to anyone. I mean, that's a beautiful, sacred moment.
So listeners, just take a second and imagine somebody saying that to you.
Yeah.
Like, just imagine the thing that you're holding in your heart that you're the most ashamed about, that you think will scare everybody away. And just imagine somebody looking you straight in the eyes and saying what Hannah said to that person, that there's nothing too big, too scary, too much that could scare us away.
Yeah.
You were calling space holding a gift before. Like, what an incredible gift to give somebody.
Yeah, that's holding space right there, right? That non-judgmental, unconditional presence. Because like someone just needs a big metaphorical hug, you know, maybe a real hug sometimes, but just like, just not someone to say, I know exactly what you mean, because they probably don't. Not someone to say, it's going to be okay, because they don't know that. Yeah.
And I'm glad you said those two phrases, because those are two phrases that people will often use when they're trying to support somebody. I know how you feel. It's going to be okay. When you might, as you stated, you might not know.
Yeah.
And it might not be okay. So that there's a difference between that and what Hannah said. Like, you can't scare us away.
Yeah, we've been watching finally the latest season of Stranger Things. Have you seen it?
I've only saw the first two seasons. Yeah.
And I don't think it's anything unique about this season, but just the way these teenagers interact with each other is sweet, but also telling of the culture of reassurance that makes me cringe, because like they're facing these crazy impossible situations like the Demigorgon and whatever, Vecna and, you know, imminent
monsters,
doom. But they're telling each other, it's going to be okay, I promise. Like, you know, and every time I hear that, I'm like, ooh, what is that doing to the other? It's, you know, the reassurance just doesn't cut it like validating does. Like validating meaning like, I can only imagine how scary that must be, or how heavy that must be. Would you tell me about it?
Right. Yeah, I remember a long time ago, I was a newlywed, and one of my friends, it was three of us, and one of my friends is like, hey guys, I got something to say. I'm like, what's up? My wife cheated on me, and she's leaving me. And we were both stunned, right? We're 20-somethings, all freshly married. And my friend goes, what the hell, man? That's all he said. And this friend who'd confessed this to us, his shoulders just sort of dropped. He relaxed. It wasn't, oh, you'll find somebody else, or, you know, she's terrible, or it was just, what the hell, man?
Yeah.
Just a validating, like, well, yeah, that sucks. It was the perfect thing to say.
Advice can come later, right? Compassion, empathy, validate their experience, their reality, get curious about it, make space for sharing, because there's so much, like that's where the magic of transformation is when someone can feel safe enough to open up vulnerably and go deep to shed the unshed tears or say the things they felt like they couldn't.
Yeah, my guess is that the things we're talking about today in this episode are the things that make good relationships good. They're the things that make good therapy good. They're the things that make the difference between a so-called bad psychedelic trip and a good one, a useful one. This is one of the biggest levers you can pull for somebody else who's struggling, is holding safe, compassionate, non-judgmental space for them.
And you can practice it in little ways. Like in fact, I would encourage it to practice it at the grocery store when you're checking out. And like people ask, you know, how's your day going or whatever. Like if you try on a stance of like holding space in these little moments, it's not only fun to see what happens and contagious, but But that's flexing that muscle of like this active listening and compassionate abiding, witnessing presence that just makes people feel so good, so seen and understood, and who knows what the ripple effects are for someone in their day and their life when those moments happen.
I like that idea. Just experimenting with it. If you want to leave an impression on somebody, actually see them, actually listen to them, actually look at them, because we don't get that a lot. So it's a great way to really leave an impression.
Yeah, yeah.
Anything else about space holding that you want to share?
Absolutely nothing. We've said it all. I'm out of words. No.
Cool.
How about you?
No, I'm drained. That's all the space holding content I have.
Okay.
Thank you for holding space for me, Reid.
You're welcome. Likewise.
Yeah.
Always a pleasure, Steve.
Always a pleasure. Psychedelic Therapy Frontiers is brought to you by Numinus, a mental wellness company committed to tackling the global mental health crisis by delivering best-in-class psychedelic-assisted therapies, contributing to the body of primary and clinical psychedelic research, and fostering healing through community connection and social responsibility. You can learn more about Numinus at numinus.com. That's Numinus.com. If you enjoyed the show today and you want to support us, here's how you do it. Rate and review the show on platforms like Apple Podcasts and Spotify. Subscribe to the Numinus YouTube channel, like the videos, and share it. Share the show or clips of the show with someone that you think will enjoy it. The content of this podcast does not constitute medical advice or mental health treatment. Consult with a medical or mental health professional if you believe you are in need of mental health treatment.